My name is Nathan Briggs. I've been a park ranger in the Black Hills of South Dakota for 11 years. In that time, I've pulled hikers from ravines with compound fractures, tracked missing children through thunderstorms, and spent 3 nights in a snowdrift waiting for a rescue chopper that couldn't fly because the ceiling was at 200 feet. I don't scare easy. I need you to understand that before I tell you any of this. 11 years, roughly 4,000 patrols, give or take. And out of all of them, there are 5 nights I can't shake. 5 patrols that change the way I see these hills, the way I see the dark, really. Because the Black Hills at night are not the same place they are during the day, not even close. The tourists who come here to see Mount Rushmore and eat saltwater taffy and Keystone, they see the postcard version, pine trees and granite and blue sky. And that's real. I'm not saying it isn't, but the Black Hills are old. The Lakota call them Hisapa. They're considered the heart of everything that is. These are some of the oldest mountains on the continent, older than the Rockies, older than the Alps. They've been here for 60 million years, give or take, and they feel like it. At night, when the tourists are gone and the gift shops are dark and it's just you and 70,000 acres of ponderosa pine, you start to feel the weight of that time. You start to feel like you're the visitor, not the other way around. I'm going to tell you about 5 night patrols. I've never told anyone about 2 of them. One of them I reported. And the report was filed and nothing came of it. One of them has a witness who won't talk about it. And one of them, the last one, is the reason I transferred from backcountry to the visitor center desk for 6 months before I could make myself go back out. I'm back out now. I still patrol at night, but I do things differently than I used to. Let me start with the first one. Patrol 1, Iron Creek Trail. September 2016. I was 3 years into the job. Comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. September in the Black Hills is one of my favorite times. The summer crowds thin out, the aspens start turning, and the nights get that clean, cold edge that makes the stars look like someone polished them. I loved night patrols in September. You could walk for hours and not see another person. Just you and the pine smell and the sound of your boots on granite. Iron Creek Trail runs about 7 miles through a drainage on the western side of the park, through some of the densest timber we've got. Old growth ponderosa, some of it 300 years plus, trunks like pillars holding up a ceiling you can't see. During the day, it's beautiful. Cathedral light coming through the canopy. At night, your headlamp gives you maybe 30 feet of useful visibility, and beyond that, it's just black. Not dark, black. The kind of darkness that feels like it has texture. I was doing a standard sweep. We'd had reports of illegal camping in the area, which isn't unusual. People set up in the backcountry without permits, leave their fire rings and toilet paper, and we go clean it up. Routine. I'd done this particular trail at night maybe 40 times. I parked my truck at the Iron Creek trailhead around 9:30. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and I could see my breath in the headlights before I killed the engine. I grabbed my pack, checked my radio, and started walking. The first 1.5 miles was normal, quiet in the way the Black Hills get quiet at night. Not silent, but hushed. Crickets winding down for the season, the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush, a great horned owl calling from somewhere up the drainage. Normal sounds. Sounds I could identify and catalog without thinking about it. That's what 3 years of night patrols does to your brain. You build an unconscious index of every noise the forest makes, and your nervous system only flags the ones that don't match. At about mile 2, the trail drops into the creek bottom and crosses Iron Creek on a set of stepping stones. The water was low, September had been dry, so the crossing was easy, just a hop across some exposed granite. I stopped on the far bank to check my GPS and log my position. That's when I noticed the quiet. Not the normal quiet. The wrong quiet. The crickets had stopped. The owl had stopped. There was no rustling in the underbrush. The only sound was the creek, and even that seemed muted, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. My hand went to my radio without me telling it to. That's the thing about instinct. Your body often knows something is off before your brain can articulate what. I scanned my headlamp across the tree line on both sides of the trail. Nothing, just pine trunks and darkness. I told myself it was probably a mountain lion passing through. Cats do that. They move through an area and everything goes quiet until they're gone. It's called a predator silence, and I'd experienced it before. It's unsettling but explicable. I kept walking. The trail climbs out of the creek bottom and switchbacks up a ridge for about a quarter mile before leveling out on a bench. I was halfway up the switchbacks when I heard it. Footsteps, not animal, human. The distinct rhythm of 2 feet on packed earth moving at a walking pace, coming from behind me on the trail. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, nothing. I started walking again. The footsteps started again, same pace as mine, and same cadence, like someone had matched my stride exactly. I turned around and put my headlamp on the trail behind me. Empty. Just the path descending into the creek bottom, the stepping stones catching a faint gleam from my light, and beyond that, black timber. No one there. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded flat and small in the silence. "Park ranger. If someone's on the trail, identify yourself." Nothing. I waited another 30 seconds, then turned and continued up the switchbacks. I walked faster this time, not running. I don't run from things I can't identify. It's a bad habit to start, but moving with purpose. The footsteps followed, same speed as before, which meant they'd accelerated to match my new pace. I want to be clear about something. I am not someone who hears things in the woods. I've spent thousands of hours in these hills at night, and I can distinguish between an echo, a deer walking, water dripping on rock, and actual human footsteps. These were footsteps, 2 feet, deliberate, on the trail. I reached the top of the switchback and the bench opened up, flatter ground, thinner timber, better sight lines. I stepped off the trail about 10 feet and positioned myself behind a ponderosa trunk wide enough to cover me. Then I killed my headlamp and waited. The darkness was absolute. It takes about 7 minutes for your eyes to fully adjust, and I stood there in the black, breathing slow, listening. The footsteps continued. They reached the top of the switchback, and then they stopped. I could hear breathing, not mine. I was holding my breath. Someone else's breathing, maybe 40 feet away in the darkness. Lay slow and even, not winded. Whoever, whatever, had been following me up a quarter-mile switchback wasn't even out of breath. I stood behind that tree for what my watch later told me was 14 minutes. In the moment, it felt like an hour. The breathing continued for the first 5 or 6 minutes. Then it stopped. And then the silence held for another 8 minutes before a cricket started up somewhere down the slope, and then another, and the normal sound of the forest slowly rebuilt itself like a system rebooting. I turned my headlamp back on, stepped out from behind the tree. The trail was empty in both directions. I walked the area where I'd heard the breathing, scanning the ground. The trail surface was packed granite and clay. Not great for tracks, but not impossible either. I found my own boot prints where I'd stepped off the trail. I found no other prints. None. Not one. I finished the patrol, checked 3 campsites, all empty, made my notes, walked back to the truck. The return trip was uneventful. No footsteps, no silence, just the normal, breathing forest. I didn't report it. What would I have said? I heard footsteps and breathing and found no one there? I'd have gotten a referral to the Employee Assistance Program and a suggestion to take some time off. But I started carrying a second flashlight after that, and I stopped turning my headlamp off on night patrols unless I absolutely had to. That was the first night, the one that opened the door. It took me years to understand that what happened on Iron Creek wasn't an isolated incident. It was an introduction. Deed to Patrol 2, Sylvan Lake Overflow Lot, July 2018, 2 years later. I was more experienced, more confident, and I'd mostly filed Iron Creek away as one of those unexplainable things that happen in the backcountry. Not forgotten, I don't forget things that happen to me in the dark, but categorized, shelved. The human brain is remarkably good at packaging things it can't explain and storing them somewhere they don't interfere with daily function. July in the Black Hills is peak season. The park is packed. RVs bumper to bumper on the Needles Highway, kids screaming at the swimming beaches, the whole circus. We worked double shifts just to keep up with the traffic stops, the medical calls, the lost hikers, and the drunk campers who think bringing a Bluetooth speaker to a national forest is acceptable behavior. Sylvan Lake is one of our crown jewels, a small alpine lake surrounded by granite spires right off the Needles Highway. It's on every tourist's list. The main lot fills up by 8 in the morning during peak season, so we have an overflow lot about a quarter mile down the road, carved into a clearing in the trees. During the day, it's just a gravel rectangle with a portable toilet and a fee station. At night, it's supposed to be empty. I was doing a vehicle check around 11:30. We'd had a string of car break-ins, smash and grabs on rental vehicles, typical summer crime, and I was making rounds to all the lots and pull-offs in the area. Most of them were empty. Sylvan Overflow was my last stop. I pulled into the lot and swept my headlights across the gravel. Empty except for one vehicle, a white sedan, very parked in the far corner of the lot, nose in toward the tree line. No lights on, no movement visible. This is common enough that I had a routine for it. People fall asleep in their cars, or they're stargazing, or occasionally they're doing things they'd rather not have a ranger walk up on. I parked about 30 yards away, angled my truck so my headlights provided some ambient illumination, and approached on foot with my flashlight. As I got closer, I noticed a few things. The car was a rental. I could see the barcode sticker on the windshield that the agencies use. South Dakota plates, which meant it was from the Rapid City Airport location most likely. The windows were up, and the engine was off, but the car was making that ticking sound engines make when they're cooling down, which meant it hadn't been here long. I reached the driver's side window and shined my light in. The car was empty. All 4 doors locked. No personal belongings visible. No phone, no bag, no water bottle, nothing. Just a clean rental car sitting in an empty parking lot at nearly midnight. I checked the perimeter of the vehicle. Nothing unusual. I ran the plates on my radio. The car had been rented 2 days earlier by a woman named Caroline Marsh, age 34, from Minneapolis. No warrants, no alerts. I made a note to follow up in the morning. Probably she was camping with friends and had left the car, or she'd gone for a night hike, which is inadvisable but not uncommon. I'd have someone check the trail registers at first light. I was walking back to my truck when I heard it, a woman's voice coming from the tree line at the far edge of the lot. "Hello, can you help me?" I stopped and turned my flashlight toward the trees. The beam caught the first row of pine trunks and then dissolved into darkness. I couldn't see anyone. "Ma'am, Park Ranger, where are you?" "I'm here, I'm over here. Can you help me? I'm lost." The voice was coming from maybe 50 or 60 feet into the timber, not on a trail. There was no trail from the overflow lot into the forest, just dense pine and granite. "Ma'am, can you walk toward my light? Stay where you are, and I'll come to you if you can't move. Please help me. I've been out here so long." Something about the voice bothered me, and it took a few seconds to identify what it was. The cadence was wrong. Each sentence had the same inflection, the same rhythm, like someone reading lines rather than speaking naturally. And the emotional content didn't match the words. She was saying she was lost and needed help, but the voice was calm, flat, not frightened, not relieved at hearing another person, just even. I've talked to genuinely lost people in the woods, dozens of them. They don't sound like that. They sound panicked or relieved or angry or crying. They sound like people who've been scared. This voice sounded like a recording of a person. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Briggs. I'm at Sylvan Overflow. I've got a possible stranded hiker calling from the tree line, requesting backup for a search." "Copy, Briggs. Closest unit is Henderson, about 20 minutes out." "Copy. I'll hold position." "Please, I'm right here. Come help me." The voice hadn't moved. Same distance, same direction, same flat tone. "Ma'am, I've got help coming." Can you tell me your name?" Silence. A long silence. Then, "Caroline." The name of the woman who'd rented the car. Now, that should have been reassuring. Lost renter, abandoned car, she's in the trees, simple rescue. But it wasn't reassuring. Something was crawling up the back of my neck, and my body was telling me things my brain hadn't processed yet. I stayed by my truck. I did not go into those trees alone. Caroline, help is on the way. Stay where you are. Can you see my flashlight? I can see you. The way she said it made my stomach drop. Not, I can see your light. Not, yes, I see the flashlight. I can see you. Specific. Personal. Like she was looking right at me. I put my back against my truck and swept my light across the tree line in a slow arc. Nothing. Just pine trunks and the dark gaps between them. Henderson arrived 18 minutes later. We geared up, took lights and a GPS and a first aid kit, and walked to the tree line where I'd heard the voice. I called out again. No response. We entered the timber and searched for 45 minutes, covering a grid pattern out to about 200 yards from the lot. We found nothing. No person, no tracks, no clothing, no evidence that anyone had been in those woods. The car was still there when we got back to the lot. It was still there the next morning, and the next day. On the third day, we had it towed. Caroline Marsh was reported missing by her family 4 days after I found her car. She'd been traveling alone, driving the National Parks Loop, Badlands, Wind Cave, the Black Hills. Her credit card had last been used at a gas station in Custer at 6:47 p.m. on the evening I found the car. That gas station is 11 miles from the Sylvan Lake overflow lot. They found her phone in the car during the impound inventory. It was in the glove box, powered off. Her last text was to her sister at 4:15 that afternoon. Heading to Sylvan Lake for sunset. So beautiful here. Love you. They never found Caroline Marsh. Search and rescue spent 2 weeks combing the area. Dogs, helicopters, ground teams, 200 volunteers, nothing, not a shoe, not a hair tie, not a scrap of fabric. People don't just vanish in the Black Hills. The terrain is rugged, but it's not the Amazon. A person who falls, who gets injured, who dies of exposure, they're found. Their body is found. Every time, almost every time. I gave a statement about the voice. I included the detail about the flat effect, the strange cadence, the fact that it didn't move from its position over the course of several minutes. The detective wrote it down. He didn't ask follow-up questions about those details. He asked if I'd seen anyone on the road, if I'd noticed other vehicles, standard questions. The voice in the trees wasn't something that fit into his report framework, so it got compressed into a single line. Ranger Briggs reports hearing a female voice calling for help from the wooded area adjacent to the lot. That's not what I heard. What I heard was something using a woman's voice, the way you'd use a lure. I can see you. I still think about that. Whatever was in those trees, it could see me standing in an unlit parking lot from 60 feet inside dense timber. I was lit by nothing but the residual glow of my truck's headlights, and it could see me clearly enough to say so with confidence. I don't park at the Sylvan Overflow lot anymore. Not at night. Not ever. The thing about these first 2 patrols is that I could still explain them. Separately, I mean. The footsteps on Iron Creek. Maybe a person who was faster and more agile than I gave them credit for, who left the trail on rock where they wouldn't leave prints. The voice at Sylvan. Maybe Caroline Marsh was in those woods, disoriented, hypothermic, behaving strangely, and she wandered off before we searched. Maybe she fell into a crevice the dogs couldn't scent into. These are the explanations I told myself. These are the explanations that let me keep doing night patrols without requesting a partner every time. But they don't hold up. Not when you put them together. And especially not when you add the third patrol. The third night is when I stopped being able to explain things. When the packaging my brain had done, the neat little folders labeled coincidence and probably nothing and you were tired, all split open at once. Patrol 3. Cathedral Spires Trail. October 2019. October in the Black Hills is when the season turns. The aspens have peaked and are dropping their leaves. The nights dip below freezing, and the park goes quiet in a way that feels deliberate, like the hills are exhaling after holding their breath all summer. Most of the seasonal staff are gone. The campgrounds are closing one by one. It's the time of year when the park starts to feel like it belongs to itself again, rather than to the public. Cathedral Spires is a popular day hike, about 1.5 miles to the base of some spectacular granite formations that shoot up like fingers from the forest floor. During the day, it's a moderate trail with great payoff. At night, it's narrow, rocky, and the spires themselves create strange shadow geometries that your brain tries to resolve into shapes it recognizes. Faces, figures, movement. It's the kind of place that would unsettle you even if nothing was wrong. And something was wrong that night, though I didn't know it when I started. I was partnered that evening with Dan Reeves. Dan was a 15-year veteran, quiet, deliberate, built like a fire plug and about as emotional as one. He'd done more night patrols than anyone in the district, and he had a reputation for being unflappable. When other rangers told stories about Dan, the way you'd tell stories about a particularly competent machine, with respect, but not much warmth. He did his job, he did it well, and he went home. I liked working with Dan because he didn't fill silence with noise. Some partners want to talk the whole patrol, about their kids, their trucks, the football game. Dan would walk for an hour without saying a word, and the silence between us felt professional rather than uncomfortable. We were two people doing a job that required attention, and we gave it our attention. We'd had a report of a possible illegal campfire up near the spires. A late-season hiker had called it in that afternoon, said they'd seen smoke coming from somewhere off-trail in the spires area. With the fire danger index still elevated, we took it seriously. An unattended fire in October with dry pine needles and wind could go bad fast. We started the trail at 9 p.m. The temperature was around 38 degrees, and there was a light wind from the northwest that carried the smell of pine and cold granite. Clear sky, half moon, good visibility in the open sections, and nearly zero in the timber. Dan set the pace, steady, measured, the kind of walk that covers ground without burning energy. We didn't use our flashlights for the first quarter mile. The moonlight was enough on the open sections, and keeping our night vision was worth the trade-off of slower going. At about the half-mile mark, the trail enters a dense stand of spruce. Engelmann spruce, different from the ponderosa that dominates most of the hills. Darker, tighter canopy, branches that start low and crowd the trail on both sides. It's like walking into a tunnel. This is where we clicked on our headlamps. Dan stopped, not a casual pause, a hard stop, one foot still raised like someone had pressed pause on a video. I nearly walked into him. Dan? He held up his hand. The ranger signal for shut up and listen. I listened. At first I heard nothing unusual. Wind in the spruce, the creak of a dead branch somewhere overhead. Then, underneath that, something else. Low, rhythmic, just at the edge of perception. It sounded like someone humming, not a tune, not a song. Just a single sustained tone that wavered slightly, like a note being held by someone who was running out of breath, and then it would stop, and then it would start again. The same note, the same wavering quality, it coming from somewhere ahead of us on the trail. Dan turned to me, and I could see his face in the edge of my headlamp's spill. He wasn't scared. Dan didn't do scared. But his expression had a quality I'd never seen on him before, a focused blankness, like he'd pulled down a visor behind his eyes. "You hear that?" he said, not a question. "Yeah." "How far?" I listened again. Sound is tricky in the spruce. The dense branches dampen and redirect it. 100 yards? Maybe less. Dan nodded. He unclipped his radio from his vest, turned the volume down to barely audible, and keyed it. "Dispatch Reeves. Cathedral Spires Trail, half-mile marker. We've got an unidentified sound ahead of us on trail. Going to investigate. Check in at 30 minutes. Copy, Reeves. 30-minute check." We moved forward, slower now, quieter, each stepping on rock where we could to minimize noise. The humming continued, constant, monotonous, that same single note rising and falling slightly with what sounded like breathing. At about 70 yards, the spruce thinned slightly and the trail opened into a small clearing at the base of the first spire formation. The granite pillars rose above us like broken teeth, pale in the moonlight. And in the center of the clearing, visible in the combined beams of our headlamps, was a man. He was standing perfectly still, facing away from us. His arms were at his sides. He was wearing what looked like hiking clothes, khaki pants, a dark fleece jacket, boots, normal attire for someone on the trail. Except it was 10 p.m. in near-freezing temperatures, and he was standing in a clearing in the middle of the forest with no pack, no light. and no visible gear of any kind, just standing there and humming. "Sir?" Dan called out. His voice was calm, authoritative, the tone they teach you in training, firm but not threatening. "Park ranger, are you all right?" The humming stopped. The man didn't turn around, didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. He just stood there, facing the granite spires, arms at his sides. Dan looked at me. I could read the calculation happening behind his eyes, the assessment of threat, the decision tree. Approach or hold. This was potentially a person in medical distress. Hypothermia can cause bizarre behavior, so can drugs, alcohol, head injuries, psychotic breaks. We had a duty to render aid. "Stay here," Dan said. "If something happens, get on the radio." "Dan, stay." He walked toward the man, slow, deliberate, hands visible. "You 20 yards. 15. 10. "Sir, I'm a park ranger. I need to make sure you're okay. I'm going to approach you." At about 8 feet, Dan stopped. Later, he told me why. He said he could see the man's hands clearly at that distance, and there was something wrong with them. The fingers were too long, not dramatically, not movie monster long, but wrong enough that Dan's brain flagged it the way mine flagged those footsteps on Iron Creek. An unconscious alarm, fired before conscious thought could intervene. Dan took a step back. The man turned around. I was 30 yards away, and my headlamp was on, and I saw his face, and I'm going to describe it to you as accurately as I can. It was a normal face. That's what made it wrong. It was perfectly, completely, unremarkably normal in the way that a composite sketch is normal. Like someone had assembled a face from average features without understanding how a face actually works together. Nose, eyes, mouth, all present, all proportional. But the expression was nothing. Not blank, not neutral, nothing. Like a mask that hadn't been told which emotion to display yet. And he was smiling. Or rather, his mouth was in the shape of a smile. But it wasn't a smile the way a person smiles. The muscles around the eyes weren't engaged, the cheeks weren't lifted, just the mouth, pulled back, showing teeth. Dan took another step back. In 15 years, I'd never seen Dan Reeves retreat from anything. "Nathan," he said. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't turn around. "Walk back to the truck." "Dan, what? Walk back to the truck, now!" The man, the thing wearing a man's shape, tilted its head. Not the way a person tilts their head when they're curious. Too far. At least 30 degrees past where a human neck would naturally stop. And it held there. I walked backward. I didn't turn around. I kept my headlamp on Dan and the figure in the clearing, and I walked backward on the trail until the spruce closed in and I couldn't see them anymore. Then I turned and moved as fast as I could without running. Dan caught up to me at the trailhead. He was walking fast but controlled. He got in the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot before I'd even gotten my seatbelt on. We drove in silence for 4 miles. Then, Dan pulled over at a wide spot on the Needles Highway and killed the engine. He sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Dan. "Yeah. What was that?" He didn't answer for a long time. A minute, maybe more. Then he said something I've never forgotten. "That's the 3rd time I've seen one." I felt the blood leave my face. 3rd. First time was 2008, Harney Peak Trail. Same thing, standing still, facing away, wouldn't respond until I got close. Second time was 2014 near Horse Thief Lake. Same posture, same... He paused. Same smile. "What are they?" Dan started the truck, pulled back onto the highway. He drove for another mile before he answered, and when he did, his voice was flat and careful, like he was choosing each word individually. "I don't know what they are. I know what they're not. They're not people. They're not bears or cats or anything with a biological explanation. I've thought about this for 11 years, Nathan. I don't know what they are. Have you reported? Who would I report it to?" He glanced at me. First time he'd taken his eyes off the road. "You write that up. You're done. They'll pull you off patrol and put you behind a desk, and then there's nobody out here who knows what to watch for." We drove back to the station, filed a report that said we'd investigated the campfire report, found no evidence of fire activity, and cleared the trail, which was technically true. Dan transferred to Rocky Mountain National Park 7 months later. We don't talk often, but when we do, neither of us mentions cathedral spires. That was the 3rd night. The one that broke the filing system in my brain. The one that made it impossible to shelve things under coincidence, or probably nothing. 3 separate patrols, 3 separate encounters. Each one different in the specifics, but sharing something underneath, a quality of wrongness that I couldn't articulate until Dan said it for me. They're not people. I had 2 more patrols after that. 2 more nights that the Black Hills showed me something that doesn't fit into any framework I was trained to use. Those 2 patrols are the ones I've never told anyone about, and they're worse than the first 3. The 4th night is the one that made me question whether these hills contain something that's been here longer than anything we have names for. And the 5th night, the last one, is the reason I slept with every light on in my apartment for 3 months straight and spent 6 months behind a desk before I could make myself drive past a trailhead after dark. I'll tell you about them. But I need a minute. I need to tell you about Dan's hands first. On the drive back that night, the Cathedral Spires night, I noticed he was gripping the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Dan Reeves, the man who other rangers described as a machine. His hands were shaking. Not much, just a fine tremor, barely visible in the dashboard light. But I saw it, and I understood something then that I hadn't understood before. Dan hadn't gotten used to this. 15 years, 3 encounters, and he was still shaking. He'd just gotten better at hiding it. I think about that sometimes. The idea that experience doesn't make this easier. It just teaches you what your face is supposed to look like while you're falling apart inside. Anyway, the 4th night. Patrol 4, Sunday Gulch, August 2021. Sunday Gulch is a loop trail that drops from Sylvan Lake down through a narrow granite canyon and climbs back up on the other side. During the day, it's one of the most scenic hikes in the park. Creek crossings, ladder sections, massive boulder fields, all of it framed by granite walls that rise 100 feet on either side. It's strenuous. Most hikers take 3 to 4 hours to complete the loop. At night, nobody goes into Sunday Gulch. The trail is technical enough in daylight. Metal ladders bolted into rock faces, sections where you're scrambling on all fours, creek crossings on slick granite. In the dark, it's genuinely dangerous. We don't patrol the interior of the gulch at night. We check the trailheads, make sure nobody started a hike too late and move on. That's what I was doing. Checking the Sunday Gulch trailhead on the south shore of Sylvan Lake. It was a Tuesday night, mid-August, and the park had cleared out early because of a weather system that had been threatening thunderstorms all day. The storms hadn't materialized, but the sky was overcast. No moon, no stars, just a low ceiling of cloud that reflected the distant glow of Custer to the south and turned the sky a dull orange-gray. I walked down to the trailhead from the main Sylvan lot. The lake was dead calm, which is unusual. There's almost always some kind of breeze off the water. The surface looked like a sheet of black glass, and the granite spires on the far shore were reflected in it so perfectly that it was disorienting, like looking at a mirror laid flat on the ground. The trailhead was empty. Sign-in register showed the last entry at 2:47 p.m., a couple from Omaha doing the loop. Well within the window to have finished before dark. I initialed the register, made my note, and turned to walk back to the lot. That's when I heard the crying. It was coming from inside the gulch, down the trail, below the rim, somewhere in that narrow granite canyon, a child crying. Not screaming, not wailing, crying. The hitching, stuttering cry of a young child who's been at it for a while and is running out of energy. A sound that any parent or anyone who's worked around children recognizes at a primal level. I stood at the trailhead and listened. The sound was faint but clear, carried up the canyon walls like the gulch was a natural amplifier. It echoed slightly, which made it hard to judge distance, but my best estimate was a quarter mile down the trail. Maybe less. Every instinct I had as a ranger, as a person, told me to go down there. A child alone in Sunday Gulch at night could die. The temperature was dropping. The terrain is treacherous. A fall from one of the ladder sections could be fatal. If there was a kid down there, every minute mattered. But I didn't go. I stood at that trailhead, and I didn't go. And I need to explain why. Because the reason is the thing that keeps me up at night more than anything I actually saw during these 5 patrols. I didn't go because of Iron Creek, because of Sylvan Lake, because of cathedral spires, because over 5 years the Black Hills had been teaching me something, and the lesson had finally taken root. The things in these hills use your decency against you. They use the sound of someone who needs help, and they put it in places where helping would mean walking into the dark alone. I keyed my radio. Dispatch Briggs. I'm at the Sunday Gulch trailhead, South Shore Sylvan. I'm hearing what sounds like a child crying from inside the gulch. I need a team here. I'm not entering alone. Copy, Briggs. Any vehicles at the trailhead? Any indication of a missing party? Negative on both. Lot is empty. Last register entry was early afternoon. Copy, dispatching. ETA approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes. If there was a real child in that canyon, 25 minutes could matter. I knew that. I felt the weight of it pressing on my chest like a physical thing. The crying continued. It hadn't changed in pitch, volume, or character since I'd first heard it. The same hitching rhythm, the same exhausted quality, like a recording stuck on a loop. That was the detail that held me at the trailhead. Real crying changes. It builds, it subsides, it shifts in tone as the person moves or repositions or tries to call out. This crying was static. Identical from 1 minute to the next, the same breath at the same interval producing the same sound. I stood there for 22 minutes, listening to a child cry in the dark, and I didn't move. The team arrived, 2 rangers and a search and rescue volunteer who happened to be monitoring the frequency. We entered the gulch together, 4 headlamps cutting through the dark, moving carefully down the granite staircase sections and across the first creek crossing. The crying stopped the moment we entered the canyon. Not gradually, not the way a child stops crying when they hear help coming. It stopped between one breath and the next, like someone flipping a switch. We searched for 2 hours, every section of the gulch, every side drainage, every overhang and boulder cave where a child could shelter. We called out continuously. We checked the creek for any sign of someone who'd fallen in. Nothing. No child, no adult, no tracks, no clothing, no evidence of any kind that a human being had been in Sunday Gulch that night. One of the rangers, a newer guy named Colton, stood at the bottom of the gulch after we'd finished the sweep and looked at me with an expression I recognized. I'd worn it myself after Iron Creek. "What were we hearing?" he asked. "I don't know." It sounded like a kid, a Nate. "I know. So where's the kid?" I didn't have an answer. We hiked out, filed our reports. Unfounded report of distressed person, search negative, and went home. Here's what I haven't told you yet. Here's the part I've never told anyone. 3 weeks later, I was going through missing persons bulletins as part of my regular briefing. There was a new one. A 6-year-old boy named Micah Torrance had gone missing from a campground in Wind Cave National Park, about 20 miles south of where I'd been standing that night. He'd wandered away from his family's campsite during an evening bathroom trip and hadn't been found. The date he went missing was 3 days before my patrol at Sunday Gulch. They found Micah Torrance 11 days later, alive, dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive, in a drainage 4 miles from his campground. He'd walked in circles. He'd been found because a hiker heard him crying, so there's a rational possibility. Sound carries strangely in the hills, especially through granite canyons. Maybe as what I heard was Micah Torrance 20 miles away, his voice carried through some freak acoustic channel in the rock. Maybe. But 20 miles through solid granite with no line of sight on an overcast night with no wind to carry the sound. I've talked to acoustics researchers. They say it's theoretically possible in certain geological formations under certain atmospheric conditions. They also say it would be extraordinary, a once-in-a-lifetime anomaly. Or I heard something else, something that uses the sound of a child in distress to draw people into dark canyons. I think about this on a weekly basis. I stood at that trailhead and chose not to go in. If that had been a real child, if some other lost kid had been in that gulch, I would have let them cry alone in the dark for 25 minutes while I waited for backup. I made the tactically correct decision. I know that. Every protocol supports it, but protocols don't help you sleep. And I hear that crying sometimes, in the minutes between lying down and falling asleep, and I wonder what kind of person stands at the edge of the dark and listens to a child cry and doesn't move. The kind of person who's seen what moves in the dark. That's what kind. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Patrol 5, Needles Highway, mile marker 67, November 2022. This is the one that put me behind a desk for 6 months. The one I haven't told anyone, not my supervisor, not my ex-wife, not the therapist the department made me see when I requested the transfer. I told the therapist I was burned out. Compassion fatigue, I said. She believed me because it's common in this job, and because the alternative explanation isn't something you can say in a clinical setting without ending up on a different kind of leave. November in the Black Hills is the quiet after the quiet. The park is essentially empty. Most of the seasonal roads close. The Needles Highway, that narrow winding road that threads through granite tunnels and past spires that look like they were carved by something with intentions, closes for the season sometime in November, depending on snow. In 2022, it was still open in early November. Barely. The road was clear, but the shoulders were icy, and the Forest Service had already put up the signs warning that closure was imminent. I was driving a night patrol on the Needles Highway, solo. This was a road patrol, not a foot patrol, just driving the highway to check for stranded vehicles, downed trees, or road hazards before the seasonal closure. I'd done this drive hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every tunnel, every pull-off. I could drive it in my sleep. Mile marker 67 is about 2/3 of the way through the Needles section, in a stretch where the road curves around a particularly dramatic spire formation. There's a small pull-off there, room for maybe 3 cars, with a short path to a viewpoint. During the day, people stop to take photos. At night, in November, it's just a wide spot in an empty road. I came around the curve at maybe 25 miles per hour, and my headlights swept across the pull-off. There was a figure standing at the edge of the viewpoint, facing out toward the valley below. Still. I slowed. My first thought was a hiker or a tourist who'd stayed too late, maybe watching the sunset and losing track of time. It was 11:47 p.m., which made that unlikely, but I've found people in stranger situations. I pulled into the pull-off and angled my headlights toward the viewpoint. The figure was about 40 feet away. They were wearing what appeared to be a dark jacket and pants. I couldn't make out details because they were facing away from me, silhouetted against the slightly less dark sky. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching. The figure didn't move, didn't react to my headlights, didn't turn around. The memory of cathedral spires hit me like a wave of cold water, standing still, facing away, not responding. I picked up my radio. Dispatch Briggs, mile marker 67 on Needles. I've got a person standing at the overlook, not responsive to my vehicle, going to attempt contact from my truck. Copy, Briggs. I rolled down my window. The air that came in was bitter, mid-20s, maybe colder with the wind chill. Whatever breath I exhaled turned to vapor instantly. Park ranger, I called out. Are you all right? Do you need assistance? Nothing. No movement. The figure stood at the edge of the viewpoint like a statue. Sir or ma'am, I need you to acknowledge me. Turn around and face me, please. Nothing. I sat there. My engine was running, my headlights were on. And I was watching a person-shaped thing stand at the edge of a cliff in the middle of the night and refuse to acknowledge my existence. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I thought about Dan's hands, the tremor. 15 years and still shaking. I should have driven away. Everything I'd learned, everything the Black Hills had taught me over 6 years of wrong nights, told me to put the truck in reverse and leave. But I didn't, because I could hear breathing, not from the figure, from behind my truck. It was the same breathing I'd heard on Iron Creek Trail in 2016, slow, even, not labored. Close, maybe 15 feet behind my tailgate, just outside the throw of my taillights. I looked in my rearview mirror. The red glow of my brake lights illuminated the road behind me for maybe 10 feet. Beyond that, nothing. But the breathing was there, steady and patient. I looked back at the figure at the viewpoint. It hadn't moved. I looked in my side mirror, and I saw something that I still see when I close my eyes 14 months later, with a clarity that hasn't faded even slightly. There was a second figure, standing just beyond the edge of the taillight glow, close enough that I could make out its shape, human, upright, arms at its sides, but not close enough to see features. It was standing in that strip of near dark where red light meets true darkness, and it was perfectly, absolutely still. Two of them, one in front, one behind. The one at the viewpoint had gotten my attention. I'd pulled in, I'd stopped, I'd rolled down my window. And while I was focused on the bait, the second one had positioned itself behind my vehicle. I want you to understand the geometry of this. The pull-off at mile marker 67 is a dead end. You pull in from the road, and the viewpoint is at the far end. There's no second exit. The only way out is back the way you came, and the second figure was standing in that path. My window was still down. I could feel the November air on my face, and I could hear the breathing, and I could see the shape in my mirror, and I want to tell you that I was calm and professional, and I assessed the situation with the rational detachment of an 11-year veteran. I wasn't. I was terrified. My hands were shaking. Not Dan's fine tremor, but a full shake, the kind that makes it hard to grip things. My breath was coming fast and shallow. My vision had narrowed down to the mirror and the shape in it, and somewhere in the back of my brain, a very very loud alarm was screaming the only word it knew: go. I put the truck in reverse. I don't know what I expected. That the figure would move, that it would step aside or charge or do something that I could react to. What happened instead was worse. I looked in my rearview mirror to back up, and the figure behind my truck was closer. It had moved, or it was moving, I couldn't tell, but it was now fully in my taillight glow, and I could see it. It had Dan's face. Not exactly Dan's face. Dan's face the way Caroline Marsh's voice had been Carolyn Marsh's voice. Almost right, close enough to trigger recognition, but wrong in ways that bypassed the eyes and went straight to the gut. The proportions were slightly off. The eyes were too steady, they weren't blinking, and the expression was the one from Cathedral Spires. That nothing expression, that mask waiting to be told what to feel. Except the mouth. The mouth was smiling. The same wrong smile. Too many muscles, none of them the right ones. It was wearing Dan's face the way you'd wear a borrowed coat, something it had seen, something it had collected. And then it spoke, in Dan's voice, perfectly rendered, every gravel note, every careful cadence. "Nathan, come out of the truck, Nathan." I didn't think. I floored the accelerator in reverse. The truck lurched backward, and I felt a sound more than heard it. Not an impact, nothing physical, but a vibration that went through the frame of the vehicle and into my bones, a low frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. The figure, the Dan thing, wasn't in my mirror anymore. I couldn't tell if I'd passed through it or if it had moved. I cranked the wheel, felt the rear tires slide on ice, caught the traction, and swung the truck around to face the road. My headlights swept the pull-off as I turned. The figure at the viewpoint was no longer facing away from me. It had turned. And in the half-second my headlights crossed it, I saw its face. It was my face with that smile, my face with eyes that didn't blink, my face tilted at an angle my neck couldn't achieve. I drove the Needles Highway at 60 miles an hour on a road with a speed limit of 25, around blind curves and through granite tunnels with inches of clearance on either side. And I didn't slow down until I hit the junction with Highway 87, and there were streetlights and a gas station, and the world looked like the world was supposed to look. I pulled into that gas station and I sat in my truck for 45 minutes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to key my radio 3 times and couldn't hold the button steady enough. When I finally raised dispatch, I reported a road hazard at mile marker 67. Ice on the pull-off, recommend closure. That's what I said, ice on the pull-off, recommend closure. They closed that section of the Needles Highway 2 days later for the season. The ice was the official reason. I put in my transfer request the next morning, moved to the visitor center desk, sat behind a counter and handed out maps and answered questions about where to see Mount Rushmore for 6 months while I tried to reassemble whatever it was those 2 figures had broken inside me. That's the 5 patrols. That's all of them. And I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to end this, how to wrap it up in a way that makes sense, and I don't think I can, because it doesn't wrap up. It doesn't end. I went back to night patrols in May of 2023. I told myself it was because the department needed backcountry rangers, and I was one of the best they had. That's true, but it's not the whole reason. The whole reason is that I went back because I had to know if it was still happening. If the hills were still doing whatever they'd been doing on those 5 nights. And I had to know, because if they were, then someone needed to be out there who understood what to watch for, not to fight it. I want to be clear about that. Whatever is in the Black Hills, whatever was breathing behind me on Iron Creek, whatever used Caroline Marsh's voice at Sylvan Lake, whatever wore a man's shape at Cathedral Spires, whatever cried like a child in Sunday Gulch, whatever built a trap from my own face on the Needles Highway, I don't think it can be fought. I don't think it can be studied or explained or categorized. I think it's been here since before the Ponderosa, since before the granite cooled, since before anything with a name walked these hills. And I think it will be here after. What I can do is what Dan did, what Dan had been doing for 15 years before he finally couldn't anymore. I can be the person who knows, the person who recognizes the wrong silence, the voice that doesn't move, the figure that stands too still, the person who stays in the truck when every instinct says, get out, the person who doesn't follow the crying into the dark. I've developed my own protocols. Not official ones. You won't find them in any training manual. But I've passed them on to 2 rangers I trust, the same way Dan eventually passed his knowledge on to me that night on the highway. I've told them what to listen for, what to watch for, when to stop walking and get back to the vehicle, when to call for backup, and when to understand that backup can't help with what you're facing. I told Colton, the ranger from the Sunday Gulch search. He'd heard the crying too. He knew something was wrong with it. He'd been carrying that night around the same way I carried Iron Creek in a locked box labeled probably nothing that rattled every time he drove past a trailhead after dark. When I told him the rest, all 5 patrols, everything, he sat quiet for a long time. Then he asked the same question I asked Dan. What are they? I gave him the same answer Dan gave me. Not because it's a good answer, but because it's the only honest one. I don't know what they are. I know what they're not. 3 months ago, I was doing a patrol on the Centennial Trail, a long-distance route that runs the length of the Black Hills. It was a clear night, early September, and the aspens were just starting to turn. I was at about mile 14, a section that passes through open meadow before dropping into a creek drainage. Beautiful country, quiet. I heard footsteps behind me on the trail, same cadence as mine, same pace, the same sound I'd heard 7 years ago on Iron Creek, like a mirror made of noise. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I stood still for a moment, listening to the silence. Then I clicked off my headlamp, stepped off the trail, put my back against a tree, and waited. The breathing started, slow, even, maybe 40 feet away. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I stood against that tree and I controlled my breathing and I waited. And after about 12 minutes, the crickets came back and the normal sounds of the forest rebuilt themselves, and I turned my headlamp on and walked back to my truck. Logged my position, noted the time, made a mark in the personal journal I keep, the one that isn't part of any official record. It's still here. Whatever it is, it's still here. It was here before me and it'll be here after. And between now and then, I do my job. I patrol these hills at night because someone has to, and because the alternative is that the next ranger out here doesn't know what I know, and they hear a woman's voice calling for help in the trees. And they go in alone, and maybe they become the next Caroline Marsh. I think about Caroline Marsh a lot. I think about the fact that her last text to her sister said, the Black Hills were beautiful. She was right. They are beautiful. They're some of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And I've spent 11 years learning that beauty and danger aren't opposites. They're neighbors. They share a property line. And in the Black Hills, that line runs through every trail, every canyon, every granite spire that catches the moonlight and looks for just a moment like something else. If you're planning to visit the Black Hills, and you should because they're extraordinary, please stay on the marked trails. Please don't hike alone after dark. And if you hear a voice in the trees asking for help, a voice that sounds flat and calm and doesn't change position no matter how long you listen, don't go in. Call a ranger. That's what we're here for. That's what I'm here for. Just don't go in alone.